Hi everyone, the topic of this video is Oliver Goldsmith. I think this is a statue of him outside of one of the buildings at Trinity College in Dublin. He was born in Ireland. Not sure of the year, around 1730, either in County Longford or Roscommon, to an Anglican clergyman. And starting in 1747, he begins a course of study at Trinity College. And then from 1752, studies medicine at the University of Edinburgh. But he really fails to distinguish himself at either place. And in 1756, he returns from a walking tour of Europe, settles in London, and begins a writing and editing career. So, like many of the other poets we're reading, he like Samuel Johnson, for instance, or James Thomson, he goes to London with literary ambitions. In 1760, he has his first real success. It's a series of letters called Citizen of the World, basically articles in the form of an epistolary travelogue using the persona of a Chinese traveler. The idea being that an outsider, somebody from far away, comes in and has can look objectively and clearly at the behavior and manners of the English people. And this was quite popular and brought him to the attention of two very influential people, Edmund Burke and Samuel Johnson. They both saw him as talented, and Goldsmith joined with him. He was one of the original founding members of the intellectual group called the Club. I think there were 9 of them originally, and he was one of the originals. And then in 1766, this begins a very short period of intense activity for him, literary activity, in a period spanning less than a decade. He publishes a novel, The Vicar of Wakefield, that's in 1766, a long poem called The Deserted Village, which we're reading in 1770, and then a pair of plays, one of which is She Stoops to Conquer, that appeared in 1773. And all of these works were widely popular and much admired for over a century, giving Goldsmith the rare accomplishment of successful authorship in 3 major literary genres. And this was something that Samuel Johnson, noted when he wrote Goldsmith's epitaph, when he died in 1774, just a year after She Stoops to Conquer. He wrote, "He touched almost every kind of writing and touched none that he did not adorn." So just while his output is small, the period of his productivity was intense and durable. So we're going to look at The Deserted Village. This is what you see on the right, is a title page from an early edition from 1770. It shows the old widow who's left behind in Auburn after everyone else has left. She's called the sad historian of the pensive plain. And let's talk a little bit about The Deserted Village. So in its combination of rustic scenery and pastimes with expressions of loss, The Deserted Village is an example of what's called pastoral elegy. And Goldsmith's evocation of childhood memories and personal feelings is indicative of a trend in late 18th century poetry towards affective modes of lyrical expression, the evocation of sensibility. And this would distinguish the poetry of the Romantic movement, of course, with writers like Wordsworth towards the end of the 18th century. In this poem, Goldsmith returns to Auburn, which he calls the loveliest village of the plain, where health and plenty cheered the laboring swain. And this evokes memories for him of a thriving, happy community. There's singing, dancing, sporting, under the benevolent stewardship of the village curate and the village schoolmaster, whom he describes at some length in the poem. And of course, the reader quickly learns that the village of the speaker's memories is no longer exists. It is gone. And what brought about this change, according to Goldsmith, was a series of laws collectively known as enclosure acts. They were passed throughout the 18th century. And what they did essentially was they parceled out common lands that for centuries had been used by the British peasantry for grazing livestock, harvesting firewood, among other things. But the strain of a growing population and advancements in agricultural technology encouraged wealthy landowners to seek out more cultivable land to expand their operations, with the obvious result that a large number of poor manorial tenants were paid or sometimes compelled to surrender their holdings and either relocate to industrial cities or immigrate to America. And Goldsmith describes both those scenarios in The Deserted Village. So Goldsmith sees this consolidation of land and power as the mechanism of luxury and greed. He calls it the rage of gain at one point. And he explicitly contrasts this with the idealized natural life of the disappearing humble yeoman class. So some things that we should be looking for as we read the poem and discuss it in class. Where do you see allusions in the poem to the enclosure acts? How does Goldsmith contrast luxury and rustic life? Where do you see him drawing that contrast? What examples can you find of the speaker's sensibility? And what role do women, interestingly, women play in shaping the message of the poem? The two important female figures that we'll want to talk about in class, the old widow being one of them. And what does Goldsmith envision as the role of the poet or poetry generally? And that concludes this short introduction to Oliver Goldsmith.